what most insiders know to be true and nobody will say is that
there's some groups that have done a fine job of saying, hey, hell, you can't say those things, because the more you say them, the more they become truth, and then a lot of people get hurt.
What wouldn't you do to save this country if that's what's at stake?
what was happening is up until 2014, it was a voluntary contribution thing. Make sure that you're participating in NATO with your full military.
So it's like going to church, and every time the box comes to you, you just pass it on.
Yes, a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. You were acting director of national intelligence.
A job I did not want.
A job that you did not want. And I guess this was on my mind. You were in that position for 3 months. And it seemed like more happened in that 3 months than so many other periods of time, quantitatively, not just qualitatively. How did this all happen? And then you obviously went in there with a mission.
I'll say a couple things that I've never said publicly that give a little context. So President Trump and I had decided that I was going to leave being U.S. ambassador to Germany in about October or November the previous year. And we had kind of planned that I would leave around February. The re-elect was going to be going on. I was in Europe at the time, in Germany, and I was going to come back home, do something maybe on the campaign or on one of the outside groups. And then a lot changed from the London NATO meeting when we really decided this. Through the holidays, the that John Bolton had resigned, and so there was a job open inside the White House, and there were some issues with the intelligence community, and so I was approached to say, "Would you come in as DNI?" And I said no. I mean, not unless the president calls and says you have to do it. I would prefer not to do that. The irony is that I had a lot of opinions about intelligence because I had been getting an intelligence briefing since 2001. So as a consumer of intelligence, I knew all the problems. I saw how bad it was in some instances. Intelligence is gathered so that public policy officials can use it to further the U.S. goals and within our political system. That's why you gather intelligence. That's why you have intelligence sources and methods. And so I thought, I have a lot of ideas about the failure of the collection process and how useful it is, but I really didn't want to go in and do it. A series of things happened, and I got asked to be the temporary one while they found a new one. And so I didn't really have a choice. It was, we need you to do this, and so I did. I became the acting director of national intelligence. There's a lot of freedom, I think, when you are given a job that you are tasked to do, but you didn't really want. So I think you're less concerned about failure. You're just going to make the right decisions. It's not something you want to be there long term anyway, right? So I came in, and honestly, the first thing that happened when I sat down and I was asking the team to brief me, they gave me 4 consulting reports that had been done for the last 5 years of how to reorganize the intelligence agencies. Now think about this. The American people had paid for outside consulting agencies to come in and say, things aren't working. What would you do differently within the intelligence agencies? 4 reports that never were implemented. I don't know why they kept adding reports. If you don't implement from the first one, why do you ask for 3 more? But they did, and so I read these, and I just simply took the reform recommendations and said, why aren't we implementing these? I found out everybody in the room was saying, I don't know why. A political will of the people that sat in this seat before you. And I was like, what do I care? Let's do it. And so we started implementing it. One so obvious one that I was attacked for in Washington, D.C., is there were multiple intelligence agencies doing counterterrorism centers, right? So like a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week room where all of these people are monitoring and doing counterintelligence strategies. Why did we have more than one in Washington, D.C.? Because of fiefdoms, like CIA wanted one and other people wanted one. And I thought, this is duplicative. We really need to get rid of this. It's wasting money. Plus, it seems to be siloed. That's not ever good if one side knows something and then you're waiting to be told, because the other agency is also doing some of the same work. So and one of the recommendations was to get rid of the counterterrorism center that was, doing double duty. So when I did, and I got rid of it, of course, all of the Washington, D.C. media for national security reporting, they couldn't find it within themselves to say, we're doing two things and he's bringing them together. It was literally Grenell cuts counterterrorism center. The next question was how long is this going to take before we're attacked because of Grenell's decision?
What's implied is that you're diminishing the capabilities of our counterterrorism.
Yes.
The reports and the findings, and as part of that, the recommendations, they were probably bipartisan, I'm assuming. There's 4 different...
I would even argue that they probably weren't even partisan. It was like outside agencies saying,
Right.
These are the things that need to be done.
Right. It's just business, right? Nobody's taking a position necessarily. And
Right.
so you just implemented it. Would you say that maybe as part of how sort of maybe the tribalism that's come up in Washington, D.C. and how divided things were, maybe that's part of the reason why people didn't want to take action? This is sort of symptomatic of why there's no action taken in Washington, D.C., right?
It's so frustrating.
Because if you do take action, it's like, what's the point? Why would I even bother? I'm just going to get flack from somebody.
Right. It's a really good point because what I was free to do in those 3 months is not come up with Ric Grenell's recommendations, but implement all of these other people. And I tried to the media to say, this is not me. This is me making the decision of what a whole bunch of people had said. That was completely lost on the media because they don't play fair. So what they wanted to do was attack Ric Grenell, firing people, reforming places, and he doesn't know what he's doing. So that was the narrative to attack me as a partisan when I was just saying I'm dusting off the dust on these reports.
Well, they set up that narrative as soon as you got there. They basically said, well, mainstream media said, you lack the credentials. You're unqualified. How did this guy get the job?
Yeah.
And why is he even there?
So that's a typical Washington, D.C. thing, is to say that someone who's had an intelligence briefing for 20 years and who is probably the number one consumer. There's nobody that's a better consumer of intelligence than our ambassadors overseas, because you're in a foreign country and you're getting briefed and you're consuming the product that all these people have been doing. You know what's useless. You know when they tell you something, you're like, really? You think that's classified information? I read that in a trade publication 2 days ago. We are woefully behind on a lot of our intel because it's become so partisan and political. And so what they were saying when they were attacking me, if you go back and you read exactly what they're saying, they would say, he didn't come from the intel world. He doesn't know collections. He doesn't know how to lead people who are intelligence officials. And I would argue that those reporters who fall into that lazy pattern of just attacking, they're the ones who are uneducated about the process. They don't realize that a consumer of intelligence is the most important person to be leading intelligence. I would argue that for the rest of eternity, until we fix the intelligence problems, that every intelligence agency official should be a consumer, not a gatherer. The gathering is the problem.
Part of it was trying to actually implement one of the lessons learned from 9/11.
It's the exact reason why we created the DNI. Because one of the lessons after 9/11 that we found out from the 9/11 report was our intelligence agencies are so siloed they're not talking to each other. But typical Washington, D.C., and I worked for President Bush, but I have to blame him and Dick Cheney. The solution, after realizing that our intelligence agencies weren't talking to each other within their bureaucracies, their solution was to create another bureaucracy. Because CIA is not talking to DIA, or they're not talking to, whatever intelligence agency, or the Hill, was to create the the Director of National Intelligence Office, the ODNI. And what I would argue is creating a bureaucracy because the bureaucracy isn't talking was the wrong thing to do. In theory, what they would push back on me and say is, well, but we're only doing this kind of overall 200-person coordinating body. If it's a coordinating body, that's great, except when I arrived at DNI, it was well over 1,500 people. And so it had ballooned even from a coordinating body to a competitive body within the intelligence agencies. That was my problem. I was trying to get it down to be a better coordinating body.
But this story got buried pretty quickly with what you were doing next.
Yeah, of course.
So what happens next?
Look, I went in and we were firing people and sending them back to their agencies. Look, what most insiders know to be true and nobody will say is that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, largely, not exclusively, so when I get attacked, remember I'm saying largely, was a dumping ground for intel agents who didn't know what they were doing. If you wanted to get rid of someone because they were terrible, instead of firing them, because you're not allowed to fire people, that should be a rule change in Washington as fast as you can. But you're not allowed to fire people because of the unions. You just have to move people around. So if you're running an agency, an intelligence agency, and you find these people are terrible and you don't want them underneath your agency, you would send them to ODNI. So ODNI became this dumping ground of all the bad people. That is the truth, and everyone knows it, and I will be largely attacked for saying it, but it is the truth.
Largely attacked.
Can I ask you something? Because I mean, there are real world ramifications for such things, and I'm a firm believer, whether you're running a tech company or you're in Washington, if you're partaking in such behavior, you could be Google, right, or you could be the White House, or some sort of security apparatus within Washington D.C. This leads to really bad things happening. I mean, would you say that when you create red tape and have a dysfunctional environment like this, is this kind of what leads to an Iraq war, right? Like we look back on something like this, we spent a ton of money, people died, we had bad intel. And so you have competing factions within the White House, and everybody's trying to, it becomes this sort of pissing contest about who's right, and we're going to go blow some shit up. But people die at the end of the day, and you look back and you're like, what the hell did we do? And are we better off? And so that's sort of the thing that I think we here in the United States.
You're speaking with too much common sense, and this is the thing: is when you have common sense to say, wait a minute, the intel was wrong. You're now talking about a bunch of intel agencies that seem bureaucratic, and you can't fire the people that are bad. You're onto something, because what honestly happened on the Iraq War and the bad intel is that we didn't have enough people within the intelligence agencies who knew these were problems, feeling like they could speak up. They didn't feel compelled to say, wait a minute, I don't agree with that. This is what happened with the Trump-Russian collusion investigation. I can tell you, because I looked at this in great detail, many people knew that this was baloney. Many people knew that we were on a wrong path. But they would either redact the information so that no one else could see it and they wouldn't get in trouble, or they just didn't have the guts to stand up and say, wait, this is wrong. And that's what we need in Washington. We need people who are not just bureaucrats getting shoved to the next job, having their yearly evaluation done so that they make it to the next level and they get that becomes a swamp of stinkiness, no new ideas, no fresh water coming in. And that's why we call it the swamp, is because they get lazy and comfortable and we all, the rest of America, suffers.
So,
And in this case, the world suffered.
how celebrated were you when the first openly gay cabinet member of a president of the United States took place? How
You mean
celebrated were
when
you?
Pete Buttigieg was announced? You mean?
Yeah, I know that there's and that actually is maybe a great way to frame this. Is it wasn't embraced
Yeah.
largely that you were the first openly gay cabinet member of a president of the United States.
Look, the Vacancy Act, which is the act that covers this, is very clear for any vacancies. And to be in a cabinet, you have to be Senate confirmed. I was Senate confirmed as U.S. ambassador to Germany. The Vacancies Act required me to be Senate confirmed while I was acting. So I couldn't leave my job as U.S. ambassador to Germany as a Senate confirmed person. I couldn't leave it. I had to do dual hat. And that's why they have this acting and why there's the Vacancies Act that's very clear about this. The Senate confirmed me, and I was temporarily doing another job. Look, President Trump didn't know that he had made history. This is a true story. I think I've only said it once or twice. But I was sitting in the Oval Office. Ivanka happened to be there. I was sitting in the Oval Office with President Trump. A couple people happened to be there, and Ivanka walked in. And she said, she looked at me and she looked at President Trump and she said, "Oh, by the way, congratulations." And the president said, "For what?" And she said, "Well, you appointed Rick today as acting DNI, and you made history as the first president of the United States to have an openly gay person in your cabinet." I can't use every word that the president said, but he said, "Come on, it's 2020. He didn't believe that had happened and that he was the one in 2020 to make it happen. It wasn't even a part of the calculation. But look, if we're going to be honest, I don't know, Mayor Pete, he was a mayor of a small town. But the reality is he got his job because he was gay. There's no question about that. He became the Secretary of Transportation with zero experience in transportation because he was filling a quota of the gay guy. They needed to put him somewhere. So he's either going to be labor or transportation or HUD or something. And that's my problem, is that all gay and lesbians suffer when we put people in positions that are not qualified and who are checking a box. Again, I know the left loves to say that I wasn't qualified for DNI. I had had a security clearance since 2001 and was an expert on the consumption of intelligence. They didn't like the fact that I wasn't a CIA agent that grew up in that system. But if that's the criteria, what did Mayor Pete do? He drove a car and he rode a bike for a couple miles, but that doesn't make you the Secretary of Transportation. So, I get the ways of Washington. It's totally fine because they're always going to do whatever they want. It's a system of elites, and they don't pay attention to the rest of America.
American Muslims are sitting with a couple of American Muslims. It's no secret that I'm a conservative. I'm the first American Muslim GOP nominee for national office in the country. To the extent that sends a positive message about America, that's really great, and I'm always happy to discuss it.
Yeah.
Because of that. But I'm American, period.
Yeah.
Number one. Second, to your point, I do think that ascribing the value of a human being substantially to race or their religion or
irrelevant characteristics.
It's a failure.
I think it diminishes, it trivializes our substantive qualifications. As I've said before, our substantive qualifications, our capabilities, and your value is either substantially or completely what you can't control. Whereas I hope that we live in a society where the things that you couldn't control are not what dictates your destiny. I think that we've been trying to perfect this union to get there for a really long time. But the things you do control that essentially amounts to what your character is, what your experience is by choice, things you've overcome, choices you've made at these tough inflection points in life that we all face. I think your merit essentially is what comes out on the other side of that. And
that's the idea of America. Merit.
And
based.
so I don't think that it's historic unless you are part of a favored group where if you are not, like, it's almost like this is like, here's like this card. You need to say exactly what is on this because of your skin color and because you're Muslim. And if you don't, there's going to be enforcement. You're going to get some negative consequences. And at this point, we have like a social credit system in our society where the negative consequences are real. There is a cause and effect relationship with you saying something, and because of the color of your skin and your religion, that's not approved on this card.
Well, I think it's institutionally driven, right, from the top down. And what I mean by that is, look, at the end of the day, if we want to lead with gay or Muslim or black or Chinese or whatever it is, I think it is shorthand for a way for me to sort of package that up and be able to market it correctly. And so whether it's some media outlet or a politician or a company, they want to basically be able to create some level of shorthand because it's a bite-sized way to package something up so I can sell it or attach it to something I'm selling. And so it's really fascinating the way that works. And oftentimes, I'm not a big fan of taking anything that sort of has cultural orientation and trying to sell it because bad things happen. And this is my biggest gripe with Washington and career politicians today, is that they want to hijack things that I think are very meaningful. And it's done in the most insincere way. And that's sort of where I started to check out. But I will say this: even I have history with something like this. When reality shows and productions oftentimes say, okay, well, look, when we're going to bring and cast people, we need one black, one white, one gay, one mixed race, one and then so some sort of like older, younger, and it's sort of this very prescriptive, templatized representation of society. It feels very manufactured at the end of the day. What it gets, it's worse than that, actually. So when I showed up on Big Brother, like, it was 2005. We were in the middle of, I'm from Iraq, was born in Baghdad, in the middle of the Iraq War. And they said, everyone turned to me and said, okay, we've got a gay person here. We've got a spicy Latina. We got this and that. We got everything. We got the Republican who's always talking about war. And so we got every stereotype. And they said, oh, first time. I was the first Muslim show up, and that's part of how I got on. And they said, okay, great. So tell us, you're gonna talk about being Muslim, right? And I said, no, I'm not. And they said they would follow me around the house, asking me to talk about it. And I said, I am not going to talk about it. I said, that's not why I'm here. And don't lower my station in life. To make me into that.
It's a power thing, though. And in Washington, it's a power thing because what you hit on was. Washington wants power, and so every person, whether you're gay or Muslim, you have to follow that line of being in that group and being the leader to that group, so that if I pick you, then you're going to bring all the Muslims along, and they're going to vote for me and give me money, and so I'm picking you because I want power within the Muslims. Right. And I'm picking you because you're a good gay, and the gays are going to follow you because we demand that the gays all think alike. So it's this power move in Washington. It's why Joe Biden was caught saying if you're black, then you have to vote for me, and if you're not voting for me, then you ain't black. It's like, get in line because I'm picking people according to the representative, and the group has to follow that person. I think when we're individuals, you can be the gay conservative. You can be, the spicy Latina that's a lesbian. There are different things that mix it up. And what I want is a table full of different ideas. And if you're all about ideas and diversity, true diversity, then you have diversity of thought.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's the premise of this show, that we this is why we did this. And in fact, I'm sure there are going to be people who try to put hit pieces out on you, by extension will say, how the hell are you talking to this guy? It's crazy. And I would say, how are we closing speaking of diplomacy, how do you close those lines?
How the hell would Ric Grenell sit across the table from you?
I know, there's the other part. There's the other side. You're going to get flack for talking to me.
So we have this Venn diagram of a confluence of issues. We have lots of tension in our society because of identity, suppression of speech, and then we have faith. So faith is a choice. Race, the race you're born with, your ethnicity is not something you can control, but faith is a choice. And we talk about religious freedom a lot, and I'm happy that we do. It's really important, not just overseas. And so I think we should talk more about religious freedom here at home. Yeah. The FBI just released in March, just a couple months ago, a supplemental to the hate crimes statistics. And I have them here. A couple really unfortunate takeaways, but some interesting questions come out of this. And so it looks like the bias motivation for hate crimes continues to soar, with race, ethnicity, and ancestry being the number one bias category that people are targeted for hate crimes. And second is sexual orientation. Anti-gay hate crimes against males is at the top, and anti-lesbian female, and I'm just reading off of this, is second. And then third, anti-lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. And then I have a question too about that, because this is under the category of sexual orientation. And transgender is mentioned there, and I just wanted to get your input on that as someone who is not really an expert in this field, but it just, I thought
gender
it'd be interesting
identity
to discuss.
is much different than sexual orientation.
So with religion,
but we're all lumped together.
with religion, anti-Jewish hate crimes, way at the top. There's no close second. But what's interesting is the last time these statistics were published, the second most targeted religious group in the United States for hate crimes were Muslims. And that's not the case anymore now. It's anti-Sikh hate crimes. And, I'd love to maybe engage with the Sikh community and try to flesh out some of that. Third is Muslims now, and then fourth is Catholic, which, what's going on with that? But one thing that I will mention is, with friends in all these groups, when I go to a synagogue, the first floor has material made of essentially fireproof material. It looks like the type of material that the Department of Defense would kind of put out a request for proposals for to use in hostile locations, or just to have defended positions. Bulletproof glass on these buildings. You have former U.S. military, pretty sophisticated special operators as a security outside Jewish facilities, not just synagogues, anything associated with Judaism. And then you wonder what's inside, and it's just a kid's school. Jews can't have a holiday in the United States, it seems like these days, without some act of complete brutality taking place, murder, substantial grave bodily injury. And that's a danger to all of us. And I do think that anti-Semitism in this country is completely getting out of control. I think one contributing factor to that I think is significant is the normalization of anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic rhetoric. It's becoming normalized. And once you start to normalize it, and we could talk about this regarding Muslims, we could talk about this regarding gays. Once it becomes normalized, human beings have a very dangerous speed with which things can become desensitized. And so it's so important to make sure that, of course, we're not suppressing speech, and that's why I brought up speech. There's a distinction between hate crimes and speech you don't like, absolutely. But normalizing anti-Semitism, I would say, from the pulpit of the United States Congress, which has been taking place now for the last couple of years, I think we're going into a territory where our Jewish brothers and sisters, I think now urgently need the help of all groups, wherever they would be able to find allies and partners who would act in support of them. I mean, that's one thing that Muslim Coalition for America is about. It's not just about us. It's not just about support us. This is about religious freedom in the United States. But anti-Catholic hate crimes on the rise, the fourth most targeted religious group in the United States for hate crimes. What is going on here? What's happening here? I know that there's a confluence of factors. I know that there's a mix of speech. There's a mix of hate crimes. But I think everybody senses that the tensions are rising in the United States. And it's like, where is this going? And why do we, if you accept the proposition that security is central to religious freedom, to any kind of freedom, for you to be able to practice your religion without the threat of death or injury or violence, right? I mean, security is probably the first feature of religious freedom. The question that I would raise is, do we have Jews in this country now, in the United States of America, wondering whether they genuinely have religious freedom when their requirement for security is so substantial just for them to practice their faith in this country? But I want to get your take on where is this going?
Well, there's a whole bunch in there. There's a whole bunch to unwind. Look, first of all, I'll say a couple of things to start, is that I believe that anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, whatever it is a human problem. I don't blame one group. I think it's across the board. I think it's everybody. And the sooner that we recognize that it's a human problem, I think the better we are for it. What's amazing about America is that we have the First Amendment, which is you get to believe and say and do anything you want, as long as it doesn't hurt somebody else. That, to me, is an amazing thing. I've lived around the world, and let me tell you, that is amazing. You get to think and have protected speech and believe any way that you want. And so I believe we need to be really aggressive about that First Amendment. The problem that I see, and I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican, but I blame the left for this. They have become completely intolerant. If you're a gay conservative who doesn't believe like they do, they will cancel you. They're doing this now with the Muslim community, the Jewish community, women, blacks, everything. There is an attack from the left on dissenting information. If you don't believe like they do, then you're out and we will cancel you. They used to be the champions of diversity, the left. I'll give it to them. But yesterday's champions of diversity are today's intolerance. They have completely become intolerant of different points of view. Look no further than first and second generation Americans. I'm sorry, but first and second generation Americans are largely conservative these days. They're voting Republican. They're voting for Trump. And that's because they left fascism and totalitarianism. They left this idea that the media is in full control and the government weaponizes things against the people. That's happening in Washington. It's totally happening. And these first and second generation Americans are the canaries in the coal mine for sixth, seventh generation white liberals who have become completely intolerant. And I'm so glad that first and second generation Americans are feeling compelled to say, I love this country. I love the American flag. I want it to stay. I came here because it's an amazing country of freedom of thought, and that they're the ones who are really trying to push through this idea of, and it goes back to the power thing. I think the left is doing this because they want power. And when they see, 4 or 5 out of 10 gays voting for Trump and voting conservative, they're like, we're losing control. When they see Muslims in Detroit standing up and saying, we don't like what's going on with you going after our kids on trans issues and telling kids under the age of 18 that they can have a surgery or hormone blockers. We don't like that. And the
without the parents' consent or, in some propositions, knowledge.
Right. It's getting out of hand. And so I think it's the power move from the left. When it comes to these statistics, I think some of them are self-fulfilling prophecies because you put money into where the statistics are leading you, right? But it's only a snapshot. So if you put more money into guarding, gay bars, and then you're reporting more crimes because you happen to have more people there recording, I think we can get off balance. In my mind, I hate the idea of hate crimes because to me, all crime is hate. If you hit me and you attack me, you should be arrested not because I'm gay, but because I'm a human being.
Is transgender a sexual orientation?
No. It's a gender identity issue.
Okay, so, and admittedly from someone who doesn't deep dive into these
Like,
issues,
I don't get
and I
it.
don't have an expert,
Someone
but
who doesn't get it.
LGBT, right? So
Yeah.
lesbian, gay, bisexual are sexual orientations. Lesbian, gay, bisexual.
Yes.
And then transgender.
Look, I think the history is that we were all looped together because there were so few of us. So they just kind of looped everybody together. But I'll tell you the dirty little secret is that the L's and the G's haven't really understood the B's for a very long time. So there's not really a camaraderie that we can be like, we're down with all this.
Is that a generally accepted notion, or how does that work exactly? Because I don't hear that. I mean, I'm not connected, so this is all new to me. But is it like amongst within your community, or you're like, I don't know about this, or hey, this doesn't really fit, or like how does it work exactly?
Well, first of all, I think if you polled all of the gay and lesbian leaders, they would absolutely say Ric Grenell doesn't speak for any of them.
Yeah. That's
So that starts from the. I don't feel like
Look, not from a position of authority, but just
this
generally.
is your opinion. I mean,
this is my opinion.
Yeah,
Like,
it's,
I mean,
it's
you
not
live-
going to be like the edict.
I mean, the same way that I don't like speak for all Muslims, right?
Right.
Like I know Muslims, I hang around with Muslims, I'm grown up as Muslim, so I have an opinion about
Yeah.
those things. But we talk about this all the time. Like we can't speak for, or nobody should be out there speaking for everybody.
Nobody speaks for all American Muslims. Anybody
Right.
who claims that is completely lying, and nobody elected any single Muslim or any single Muslim organization to claim to speak for all of them. And we also have the saying, you put two Muslims in a room, you get three opinions. So just the idea that you can actually reflect. Anyway, so
There was a gay joke in there that I'm going to avoid. I'll get me in big trouble. Look, I think these are all really good questions, and I tend to think that we were all lumped together. The LGBTQ plus whatever, I don't even know what it is anymore, to be honest. I think we were lumped together because we were a small community, and they wanted everybody to be a little bit bigger. Now it's like exploded. It's like the popular thing to, go to school and try it out and claim that you're something else. So I'm not sure what the truth is in there. I tend to think that if you're under the age of 18, it's a little bit, you shouldn't be allowed to have a surgery. You shouldn't be allowed to do hormone replacement. I don't think that that's anti-trans.
Well, I think the counter argument is they want to, if they know, they want to basically take care of it early before they're fully developed. Otherwise, they've missed the opportunity.
So I have trans friends who have pushed back on me to say, if I would have taken hormone replacement drugs earlier, my voice wouldn't be so deep. Now that they're transitioning. Look, I still passionately believe we don't allow kids to go to our movies. We don't allow them to get tattoos. We don't allow them to drink. It is not crazy. It is common sense to say if you're under the age of 18, you shouldn't be allowed to take hormone block. I don't believe that a child knows enough to sign off on hormone blockers. I just don't believe that. And if a parent is kind of forcing this on their child, look, I think it rubs up against this whole argument of parental rights, right? That's the other argument that people push back on me, and they say, but if the two parents agree and the child agrees and the doctor agrees, why are you standing in the way? I still firmly believe that a child is not able to sign off on hormone blockers when they're under the age of 18. I mean, look, the studies, scientific studies will tell you that the brain is not fully developed until like 28. And so I'm not suggesting that, you don't drink until 28 or, don't get to go to a movie, but an R movie. But I think the point is that we have to have some sort of an age of adulthood. And in our society, joining the military and a whole bunch of other things, it is largely recognized that the age of 18 is that point. And so I just think that we should protect kids, delay it. And if you're over the age of 18 and you're not hurting somebody, I become a libertarian. Knock yourself out. Go live whatever way you want. I think that it's an under age 18 and over the age of 18.
Noted. So can we just real quick? I think there's an interesting point that I wanted to kind of piggyback on what you were saying related to this data. I think there was the point of when hates and stereotypes become solidified within society through the mode of words. And I think communication is an important one, and I think this would be a nice segue into kind of delving into Ric's background. You've had a long history of communication, working in the field of communication, right? And whether it mainly political, I think maybe some business, and so I think it's important to note, the way we communicate about things, and I think there's sort of a fine line between, hey, this is freedom of speech, and then I think this is where sort of the hot contested battles around what can we say and the internet and media and so on is starting to really become hot and heated. There's some groups that have done a fine job of saying, hey, hell, you can't say those things, because the more you say them, the more they become truth, and then a lot of people get hurt. Now, we've done this this is something that I think we've been really good at getting the support for. If we want to kind of, cast a shadow on certain countries and go wage war, and we drum up those, that support and beat those drums and so on. But what's happened, I think, is domestically, we've started to kind of do that against ourselves. And so now we've demonized groups of people. And typically, if it's left or right, or if it's certain types of people and it's okay to hurt them, we dehumanize each other en masse. And then it becomes okay. It becomes less painful when we go and hurt each other in some way, whether it's through words or through action and through violence. And I think that becomes really catastrophic. But furthermore, I would say the institutionalization of such things, which then turns into culture wars. And so the institutions have decided to kind of join in on the fun, if you will. And what I saw happening over the years, and this is interesting because I felt as though there was a point in which, and I do not, just to be clear, I don't participate and call myself either left or right. I like to just take the information that is in front of me, and then I make my own decisions. But I think for the most part, I will put out there, I've only voted Democrat. I've spent more time watching CNN than Fox News, things like that. I will say that over the years, though, there was a point in which, and I think it was around this rage against Trump. And I myself, I did not, partake and support Trump, but I
MAGA
will.
Rallies?
I was not the rallies, no. But there was something interesting that happened. It was and I think it was money driven. CNN was seeing that they weren't getting the ratings. Fox was. And they still aren't, actually. And so, and there was a certain style about the way that Fox kind of was it was, punchy, it was forceful, it was he cut your, you bring your guests on, but cut them off, and it was this certain style about it. And then, and all of a sudden one day, I remember I was Don Lemon started doing that. And I was what the hell's going on? This is different. And then CNN decided, and other mainstream media started to take those positions, and we started to see a lot more of that forceful, let's try to cancel everyone, and become a lot more aggressive. And I thought that was really strange and fascinating, and I was wait a minute, should we be doing this?
Can I push back a little?
Yeah.
So first, and the beginning part, what I would push back and say, I think we live in the greatest country in the history of the world. People need to wake up every morning and be like super thankful for living here.
I agree.
And I think we got to lighten up.
I agree.
Honestly.
We talk about this podcast, and we're like, how do we talk about heavy shit? But
No,
almost
but
do it
about
where
I'm-
it's like do it in a light way. And I think similarly, we do need to lighten up. I think it's part of a broader thing.
But when you were talking about like people who get hurt from words and we got to be careful what we're saying and people can be hurt, I actually think we've gone way too far with that. We're teaching kids that they're always going to be hurt and to come up with a reason, and depression is out of control.
So I do agree with I agree with that as well. I do agree. I think we've got to a point where we're sitting here and we're like, we're training each other to say, what you said. It's not even what you said anymore. It's how you said it.
Look,
and the way it made me feel.
Let me
And
ask
it's like,
a
I can't
harder.
even.
Let me ask a harder question, which I actually think about myself. We're in this era now where communications, political communication specifically, has this labeling tactic to it. So if you are a conservative, the word Nazi comes up all the time.
But
You
that's my
have
point,
you
right?
have words like existential threat to democracy. Okay, so now when you have laid down that type of label, what wouldn't you do to save this country if that's what's at stake?
But that's exactly the
creating
point.
an exigent, existential perception of a threat to the nation. So the means, the utility to go about trying to prevent that from happening essentially start to feel more and more justified for a larger segment of the population.
Or
I
there's
think
a
that's where we're
different
getting
path,
dangerous.
though. I think there's a different path. And what I was trying to get at is if everybody would just kind of relax and not be so offended, we could bring back humor. We could bring back comedians. And I actually think that this is a very important tool of America to make fun of people. A good gay joke is hilarious to me. I'm not offended by that. And I think that this whole idea of the First Amendment, you get to say whatever you want. And if I'm not physically hurting you and I say a joke that's a joke about Islam and you're totally offended, guess what? Don't have me on your podcast again. Don't be my friend, and don't read my tweet.
What you're saying is that doesn't necessarily, and we shouldn't suppress speech. But there was a U.S. Senate candidate in Pennsylvania, a Republican, who was running for the GOP nomination last cycle by the name of Kathy Barnett, who openly and publicly stated, I believe it was on Twitter, that Islam should be banned from the United States. And you responded to that. Let's talk about that. What happened?
She also had more than that.
Okay.
That's the one that set me off.
And why did you get set off?
There was a
tell us
series
what
of
happened.
tweets that she had put out that were, one of them was, she was trying to be funny, I guess, but then she took it even further, and she said, I don't want to board this plane because there's a gay person that I'm going to have to sit next to, and I don't know how she knew that she had to sit next to the person, or maybe the person was boarding. But at first, if there was a gay joke in there, I would have laughed. But there wasn't. There was I don't want to board a plane with a gay person. And then you combine those with the other hate that she was doing, and it really set me off when she said that we must ban Islam from America. She was dead serious. This wasn't a joke. This was a serious point that there should be no protections for Islam in America because, in her mind, all Muslims were terrorists. Now, she didn't say that last part, but that was clear. And if you read the whole context, you don't go out and say Islam should be banned from America unless you're thinking everyone who follows Islam is bad. All I did was point out her tweet and say, this is something that the voters of Pennsylvania should be able to see, that this person is attacking the First Amendment of the Constitution. I believe the U.S. Constitution is a really good thing. She clearly wants to change the U.S. Constitution to ban certain religions. So then I said, what's next? Mormonism? What's after that? You don't like the Baptists? You don't like Judaism? What is next? Because quickly after Islamophobia, it's homosexuality. And then you're getting where I don't get to run for office or be a part of an administration, or I have to think a certain way in order to participate, or it's going to be banned. Is that what that's the slippery slope that I was worried about. All I did was highlight her own words. And I think a lot of people, including Sean Hannity, saw some of that, highlighted the fact that she was wanting to change the U.S. Constitution. I think it's dangerous. That's my opinion. I get to say, your rhetoric is dangerous.
What was the response?
Well, to this day, they attack me for taking out Kathy Barnett with the help of Sean Hannity and others, or they say that I was lying. Look, go back and look at her tweets. She's the one who tweeted it. I only highlighted it. And again, I think we all make mistakes. Every single person makes mistakes. I'm a Christian. I believe that every morning I get up and there's new mercies for everything that I've done wrong. And
Has
so
she retracted?
It's in the heart.
Has she retracted
That's
that?
my point. If she would have once said, you know what, I said that in the heat of the moment. I absolutely don't mean that. The U.S. Constitution guarantees freedom of speech, and I'm deleting that tweet. I would have never brought it up again.
So what were you lying about, or what were you accused of being lying about?
Her record, that she's a Christian that cares passionately about Christian things, and that I'm lying about her record.
So this was someone who was polling pretty close to the front runners and could have won the nomination for becoming a lawmaker. So you have someone who is running for public office to be a lawmaker, stating
she was also running against a Muslim. Let's be honest.
Oh, is that what happened?
She was running against Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz is Muslim.
Oh, that's right.
But
And so I just think
So she went for the jugular.
she
this was an old tweet.
Oh, I see.
look, if she were to have been elected, she would be a lawmaker. She announced what her policy positions are, and we're in an era, especially on the conservative side, that we're very interested in you doing what you say you're going to do when you get into office. So what would that look like? Would it be introducing a bill in the U.S. Senate to ban?
Exactly.
So what do we mean by ban? So does that mean
Arrest Muslims?
You have to renounce that you're Muslim. You get to stay, and if you don't, there's the boat
Look,
you got to dock. But I'm a former counterterrorism prosecutor. I'm an American Muslim. I'm a service member. I'm a major in the U.S. Army Reserve.
Thank you for your service.
I can't believe that.
But you
they
shouldn't
pay
even.
us to do
I mean,
it.
here's the thing: you shouldn't even have to qualify yourself in that way.
The reason why I'm stating that is because to me, all those things are seamless.
Yeah.
Okay. And so there's just a little bit to unpack here, and I want to acknowledge that there is a legitimate concern with terrorism in this country. There has been. Okay. And we have to destroy all radical Islamic terrorist networks in the world. We have to get this country to a place where radical Islam can't touch this country. But the issue is, and I don't believe that she doesn't understand what I'm about to say, right? Like, of course she understands it. But I think the broader point is, I don't believe that shit, and most of us don't, right? So what I'm asking for is these terrorists don't have any credibility whatsoever for us who passionately, conservatives, Democrats, doesn't matter. We passionately oppose terrorist networks. They're murderers, they're barbaric, and they need to be destroyed. They have no credibility. But as soon as they talk about religion, it's like, hey, this is the religious authority for Islam. Let's go ahead and take the crown of religious authority
So can
and
I
put
ask
it on
you,
the terrorist networks.
are you offended by Islamic terrorism?
Am I
The
offended?
phrase Islamic terrorism?
No.
Are you offended by Islamists?
No, I personally, all these terminologies, some guy like created it, so I try to capture the essence of what we're talking about.
I'm asking sincerely just because
I'll tell you.
Not really. I don't generally use like Islamophobia, for instance. I don't use that term. It's
I'm
phobia is
I'm
fear.
personally opposed to it. I'm opposed to it because I think how we
of what?
yeah so I think the
Islamic terrorism?
yeah, because what it does is it creates an affinity. So you create affinity mapping when it comes to communication, right? So that's an easy way to start to kind of sell something. And so Islamist or Islamic
Radical Islamic
terrorism,
Yeah,
I think it creates this closeness, this affinity between the two, and so it's a hop, skip, and a jump away from the core of it.
So what would you say if there are radicals within Islam?
It's a tricky one, right?
Yeah.
It's tough because I think the point of origin was you saw a bunch of Muslims doing some bad things, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, what is that? What are we looking at right now?
Give us a new label.
I don't know if I'm qualified to do that, but I think it's
give us a common sense one.
If I was to unpack this, I mean, at the end of the day, I think you have people who within every group who are like, I think people have there's some grace in some cases where you're like, okay, look, you see a bunch of people and you're like, no, they're not that, they're crazy. And so usually that's the out for when you don't want to like really like diminish the entire group of people. You just call them crazy and you lump them as the other. And so, but we were never going to call ISIS a bunch of crazy motherfucking whack jobs, because they're like, it's not. There's probably a number of reasons why we wouldn't do that. But if I was to break it down and take a look at these guys, I think a lot of them are illiterate. A lot of them don't even know what the faith is. They probably have never read the Quran. And they thought it was probably pretty interesting to go be a part of something. I don't know what the hell was going on there, to be honest, but to have a gun and feel like you're going to get that rush.
So I have 2 points on that. One, I would say, if your point is we need to do a better job of making sure that our messaging and our communications rallies around the point that not all Muslims are terrorists, of course, that we have to do a much better job. But also, I would say there's a second point, and it's a fervent point. I am comfortable saying radical Islam or Islamic radicals because these radicals are the ones who are manipulating Islam. And in some ways, the way I look at it is bifurcating Islam from the radicals by saying these people are trying to, negative word radical, do something to the other word, right?
Is radical always negative, or what can it be perceived as too much of something, right? And the radicalization of or too much of something basically leads you down to he's just too religious. And so thus if you become too much of that, and so then what we need to do is we need to just make sure that we placate or water down such a thing.
I agree that
becomes where it becomes a little
I agree that
dangerous.
we need an update to the terminology system, generally speaking, but I think that there is a pretty large segment of our society that is doing their best to accurately depict and describe a problem and identify what
There's no question the problem exists.
So
I think it's more about making sure, like, okay, for instance, I think I'm pretty good. I'm not always perfect, but I'm pretty good at always saying the Iranian regime. I don't like to say the Iranians, right? I don't want to say the Iranians are terrible because I have a lot of friends who are Iranians who are fantastic. It's the Iranian regime. It's the government versus the people. I think, it's a little controversial, but I think we got to start doing a little better job when it comes to Russians and Putin and the Russian government, because it's the Russian government that's the problem. But I see this rush now into sanctioning, and anybody who's Russian suddenly is a terrible person because of the Russian government actions. We got to do a better job there.
Radical Islamic terrorism, I don't have a problem with that terminology. I think that we can have better terminology. I think Islamophobia, I don't use that term. I think that anti-Muslim sentiment 100% exists. Islamophobia, phobia is a fear, right? So it presupposes...
How about homophobia? Should we not use that?
I think people are afraid
of... Well, look, I think people, like I said, I think people are just trying to describe something. But I think that there are people who hate Muslims that maybe don't fear them, that it's not just limited to fear. You could have anti-Muslim or anti-gay sentiment without...
Don't you think, though, it's also, if you hate them, it's because you do fear them?
I think it's rooted in
I think
fear.
Muslim terrorists are obviously fear is going to be like a big feature. I just don't know that it captures. Look, I think that we could have better terminology. I hope that we overhaul it. But in the meantime,
I'd rather concentrate on stopping it than coming up with a new word.
Yeah.
But so just let's switch gears real quick and talk about your time in Europe and NATO. well, you were the U.S. ambassador to Germany. Germany is a member state of NATO.
Largest economy in Europe, the largest economy of the European NATO members.
You were opposed to Nord Stream, right?
Yeah,
Opposed to Nord Stream. You get there, you get to Germany, and I'll just read a couple of the quotes from your very warm reception from the European people for your service.
Some.
Just a couple. Just a couple. So the Luxembourg foreign minister, why the Luxembourg foreign minister is weighing in, maybe you probably have the story, but the Luxembourg foreign minister.
I think he's a gay guy.
Okay.
I think.
All right. So says, among other things, that is just not how you can treat your allies, end quote. Leader of Germany's Social Democratic Party says Grenell, quote, does appear to need some tutoring in the fine art of diplomacy, end quote, fine art of diplomacy. So it sounds like diplomacy is an end in itself, and the mission might be separate from that. But tell us about your warm reception when you got to Europe as a U.S. ambassador to Germany.
So I'll say a couple of things. One, I took very seriously and was incredibly humbled to be given the title of U.S. ambassador to Germany, but to anywhere, right? If you are given the title that you're representing America, I thought that was pretty cool. If you take the fact that Germany is the largest economy in Europe, and we all know the special history of Germany, they are not paying their obligations at NATO. Matter of fact, out of the 31 members of NATO, only 8 pay their fair share.
What does that mean? Can you just for myself included and
in
for those who are watching, what does that mean not to pay?
In 2014 at the NATO meeting, because it was voluntary contributions to your military to make sure that if you're joining this amazing NATO alliance, that you got a prepared military to participate. You're not joining NATO so that the Americans can protect you.
And let me put a finer point on that, if I may. You are in a group that if one of you is attacked, Article 5 of NATO, then all countries that are a part of NATO will go to war with you, okay? And to put a finer point on it, it's 2% of the GDP of your nation being spent on your national defense, not on our national defense.
So what was happening is up until 2014, it was a voluntary contribution thing. Make sure that you're participating in NATO with your full military. There was a frustration from Americans and others, the British, that people weren't doing this on the honor system.
So it's like going to church and every time the box comes to you, you just pass it on.
Not really.
Yes, a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
But in 2014,
Exactly.
in 2014, at the Wales NATO meeting, all of the countries came together and said, let's formalize this a little bit different. So in 2014, they said, we're going to give everybody 10 years to ramp it up so that you and every country are going to pay 2% of your GDP towards your own military and 20% of that towards technology that is forward-facing, that is cutting edge. This was a commitment by NATO to say, let's be at the forefront of technology and let's make sure all of our militaries within NATO are the best.
So we're better together as an aggregate.
Yes. The frustrating part is that they made the commitment in 2014 that in 10 years we'll do it. Germany's not even on track. They haven't taken it seriously. They're the largest economy, so their 2% of their GDP is a serious number. It is a big, large number that if the Germans were able to participate in a better way, that would be a good thing for NATO. I would argue your first quote, this was a long answer, your first quote was allies don't treat each other like that or something. That was my point to the Germans. You're our ally. You made this pledge. Allies don't treat each other like that. You're supposed to pay up. And by the way, in Germany, on every corner, there's an amazing opera house and a symphony. And their infrastructure is outrageously amazing. Their airports are gorgeous. Their autobahns and streets and bridges are amazing. because they have the money that they're spending on that.
I'd
and not their
I'd like
military.
gorgeous infrastructure here too. That would be nice.
Exactly. But what my problem is on NATO is now we're talking about adding new members of NATO when the current ones aren't paying their fair share. 8 out of 31 are paying their 2%.
So what's the
obligations.
angle? I mean, do they say like, look, it's a big economy. Do we really need to pay 2%? Why
can I
do
take
we
a
No, you want to
spread-
know what Merkel said to me directly? She said, nobody wants a German military that's big and bad. And I said, here's the problem. That's an excuse, Chancellor, because in the 1990s, Germany had the largest military in all of Europe, and everything was okay. I think the idea that the Germans use as an excuse is that because of our special history, as they call the Holocaust their special history, because of that recklessness killing strategy that the government of Germany did back then, nobody wants to see us with a military. That is the wrong idea, because I would never buy that it's either a Holocaust or a working military. I mean, look, the Germans, when they volunteered to have German military go into Afghanistan to train soldiers in Afghanistan, they couldn't even transport their soldiers to Afghanistan. We had to go in and transport them because they didn't have working transportation.
I was in Afghanistan for 18 months during the surge as a Defense Department official, and we had 50 plus coalition nations with us on the ground in uniform. Germany was obviously there. They characterized themselves as a humanitarian
Training.
military
They were
and
trainers.
humanitarian mission, and so they will not actually engage in combatant operations, obviously preserving their inherent right to self-defense. Look, I think the coalition itself is incredibly important. I think there will be a time, again, where it will come into play. But my answer to your question is we have to address some bitter truths, and I think that's what Rick was doing when he was out there and making people uncomfortable. But the fact is that
I always did it in a nice way, but I would be blunt. And I would say, you were saying that I'm not a diplomat, but I think your definition of diplomacy is sitting in a restaurant, eating nice food. And my definition of diplomacy is I'm representing the American people, and we're getting taken advantage of by you.
So in turn, you got disinvited from the good dinners then.
No, I had the most amazing dinners at my place.
Let me ask a question about all of this, because it involves this situation of Russia invading Ukraine and NATO. It is said in some circles, and I think this is in some cases it's Democrat, in some cases it's Republican. And interestingly enough, Republicans, many Republicans have said, I don't know if we should be in this situation and supporting this war. And so I just wanted to get a better understanding. We're not outwardly supporting it. We're kind of covertly supporting it. And Ukraine is not part of NATO. They've expressed many times that they want to be. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but NATO was originally created as sort of a defense organization rather than an offensive one.
Defense against Russia.
Was it created as a defense, specifically Russia? Okay, so here we are again. And this is sort of a very touchy subject, especially for let's just put ourselves in an empathetic position. Is it true? Can it be seen as we took a position, especially since NATO was created for that reason, that we went and there's a jigsaw puzzle. There's a long border with Russia. We've kind of fulfilled our NATO destiny of getting all that land and saying, hey, we've converted all these folks over into NATO. There is that one last piece, Ukraine, that makes that long border pretty much indefensible, right? Putin's looking at this and says, hell no. Is it possible we've offended this guy, or are we just going to go from one country to the next and say, here's another crazy motherfucker, and he's acting completely irrationally? At what point in time, I'm sure there's a lot of smart people in this sort of war room situation saying, to hell with him. Hey, we're going to make our decisions that are in our best interest. So then the question becomes, is this in our best interest? Or do we always take an offensive strategy because the defensive one is far worse? And so where is that rationale, and how do you start to kind of like think about strategically all of this stuff? Because I think that it depends on your personality, it depends on who's in power, and how you're deciding. Like, look, we don't want to wait around and see what happens. We have to kind of be controllers of our own destiny. And so I can see those points of view as well, but at the end of the day, at what cost? It's like Ukrainians dying. Cynically, we've heard this actually openly, people saying, out loud, it's a Ukrainian soldier at the end of the day. It's not a U.S. soldier who's paying the price. And that's a pretty bold statement to say, and I don't know if I agree with that. So it's like there are all these sort of components to it. And at the end of the day, there are human lives at stake. So like, what are your thoughts about all of that? I know there's a
lot in there. Yeah, there's a lot in there. Let me say a couple of things first. If you go back to like Reagan's days, which is really when I started to be an informed political person, the Soviet Union back then was the evil empire, and we really tried to challenge communism. Now we've got communist China, so we're still dealing with communism. Communism is a terrible thing. It lies to people and ruins people. And so the idea that we have to defeat communism right here, I love it. I see it. America must defeat communism because our capitalism, free markets, rule of law, respect for human rights defeats the communists every single time. So we shouldn't be afraid of that. When the Soviet Union started to break up, and Russia then started to lose some of its satellite areas, and they became countries. I think we started to win, right? We had the Cold War of some people deciding that they weren't going to take sides. There's this whole group at the UN called the Non-Aligned Movement, which said we're not going to support Russia or the United States. We're going to like be in the middle. And so in many ways, when you look back, we won. We defeated communism. But now that the Chinese are coming forward with communism, we still have to be vigilant about it. I think a lot of people who view Ukraine as the fight for communism are thinking about the communist China and the old 80s Soviet Union. I'm with you. Russia is, and specifically Putin, he's a terrible thug. He's a killer. But where I'm going with this philosophically is that when you look at NATO, which is there to defend against Russia, 8 of 31 countries are paying their bills. The rest of them are not paying their bills. I don't want to extend this umbrella of NATO when you're just asking the American people to do more. I think the reality is that roughly half the population of Ukraine are Russians. You look at what Putin did in terms of grabbing a portion of Ukraine, Crimea, under Obama. He didn't do any advancements under Trump. We had his pipeline sanctioned. Joe Biden came in and dropped the sanctions on the Putin pipeline. And to me, the Democrats and Joe Biden signaled to Putin, we're weak, we're not that strong, we're going to drop the sanctions on your pipeline.
And you're talking about the pipeline that's going into Europe through Nord Stream?
It was the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, Putin's pipeline.
And that was basically rendered non-functional.
It was not functional under the Trump administration. We had it sanctioned, and they weren't able to complete it.
Got it.
We had those sanctions on. When Biden came in, the Senate Democrats and Joe Biden, and this gets a little bit dicey, Merkel, and one of the reasons why I had a bad reputation in Germany is because I kept saying, don't build this Russian pipeline into Europe. It's not good. You're giving the Russians too much influence. At the same time, you're not paying your NATO bill to stand up against Russia. You're in a deal with them. So you're feeding the beast. That wasn't popular.
Creating dependency.
That wasn't popular. But we in the Trump administration believed that pipeline was not good. Merkel did not like us for it. When Joe Biden came in, Merkel, who was still in office then, went to Joe Biden and said, can you please drop these sanctions on us? We don't want these sanctions on the pipeline. Joe Biden cares more about being liked by the Europeans, and in this term we call consensus. He wants consensus. He wants everyone to get along, and you have to like me. So when you come to me and you say, can you drop the sanctions on the pipeline? That pipeline is not good for America. We should have it sanctioned, except Joe Biden said, to be nice to Merkel and so I can be liked by the Europeans. Yes, Chancellor, I'll drop those sanctions. He gave Merkel that gift. Putin saw that as weakness, just like Obama. And what did he do? He decided to go in. He didn't go in under Trump. We had that pipeline sanctioned. Now, the Democrats will tell you, Donald Trump is a tool of Putin. Oh, really? Because Putin did not invade under Donald Trump. He did under Obama, and he did under Biden. Why did he skip? Why did he skip Trump? Because we were there being tough. Now, let me just finish with this final thought about Ukraine. Now that I'm a diplomat, I've worked at the State Department for 11 years, I believe in the philosophy that the President of the United States needs to have two strong, opposing cabinet secretaries to make America safe. One is the Secretary of Defense, who is pushing the president to be serious about the military and war, and we don't negotiate, we protect America with military equipment. The other person is the Secretary of State. This is not about culinary diplomacy and being nice. If you want to avoid war, you better have a son of a bitch as the Secretary of State, who goes into these tables and says, guys, if we don't solve this here, if we don't represent peace and figure out a tough way, I got to take this file and go back to the United States and transfer it to the Secretary of Defense, who doesn't negotiate. He's going to bomb you. And so I want to see diplomats who are tough. Unfortunately, the diplomatic world wants you to be weak and have culinary diplomacy and do art exhibits. I think that's a waste of the tool that's the State Department. You better have a very tough diplomat. But the Democrats make fun of tough diplomats. They made fun of me for being too tough. How are you making fun? I think that if you don't have tough diplomats, you're going to have war. You're going to have war. And this is what I would do. If I were ever in charge of the State Department, I would train up these our Foreign Service, American diplomats, to go into very dangerous situations and be diplomats and try to solve the situation while it's in a crisis before you send in war. The lessons of Iraq, the lessons of Afghanistan, are that we can't send our men and women from the military with guns into a place and then try to win hearts and minds and do a negotiated settlement. Not at the barrel of a gun. You got to have diplomats who are tough. And I'm so tired of this current State Department, Anthony Blinken, who has pushed two big programs at the State Department. One is culinary diplomacy, where he says every good discussion starts with a meal and a glass of wine. No, it doesn't. That's ridiculous. That is making us look stupid. The other thing that they just did a whole video on, they were so proud at the State Department. They had this woman who was dressed to the nines in Gucci, and she sat there with a really nice art behind her, and she said, the Art and Embassy program is an amazing tool for peace.
Is this a real program? I mean, I love art, but is this?
I love art too.
I'm just curious.
The Art and Embassy program is a real program, but I'm going to tell you the skinny on it. Very wealthy people loan their art to embassies because they don't have to pay for the insurance. The State Department and you and the U.S. taxpayer takes over the insurance. So you still own the piece. You get it guarded at an embassy. And guess what? No one gets to see it unless you're invited into the embassy and go through security by the ambassador. It is the most elitist program ever. Is art a good thing? Of course it is. But when we're paying tax dollars to pay for the insurance of really wealthy people to be able to have their art at an embassy, and it's not available to the public, it's only available on a invite-only basis to see that, that's not a very useful program. I'm sorry. I'm going to get creamed for saying that. I love art. The art and embassy program needs to be dramatically changed so that it's accessible to the people, or don't have the program
So
where you're paying for rich people.
You want to end by attacking art. Okay. We attacked everything. We attacked Muslims with the word radical
you
Islam.
See this piece right here? I bought this piece in Germany.
How'd you get that?
By
thing
the way,
shipped
the
over
state
here?
of California had to come at me to, they wanted their tax. I had to pay $500 to the state of California for bringing this piece in from Germany because there was an art tax. Okay, this is a very famous artist in Germany. I'm not going to say his name because then he might get hate mail.
Canceled.
Or canceled.
Yeah.
But as you know, there's Freddie Mercury. I loved this piece when I saw it. So I'm just pointing this out because I love art. I think that art is...
So
Why
selfishly,
don't you donate that to an embassy?
It's an embassy, so I don't have to pay the
Yeah,
$500. Maybe that I should have done that. No, I like to look at it. That's why I got it.
Look, just so that we straighten out the record, an attack on the U.S. Embassy art program is an attack on art itself.
Exactly.
Just like attacking Tony Fauci
I'm
is
so
an attack on science.
unsophisticated. I'm so unsophisticated.
No, we're talking, so this conflation of programs with words in them, like Counterterrorism Center, U.S. Embassy Art Program, changing something about
Who's
it.
against art in embassies program?
Who's against
Doesn't
counterterrorism?
that sound amazing?
How could you be against counterterrorism and art?
I think that's creation phobia. At the end of the day, so we have to be careful.
We got a new term. So you did give us a new term out of this. Creation phobia.
You hate creatives and the creation of things.
Those New York City ad agencies are waiting for you. So, Rick, you beat cancer.
Yeah.
Tell us what you want about it, but for you on the other side of that now, for people who have never battled cancer but might in the future and don't know it yet, what would you say to us?
Have either one of you guys had cancer?
My father actually battled cancer, so I lived in the oncology ward for a couple of years. In the beginning, he made it. They gave him about maybe 3 months to live. Stage 4 lung cancer. Oof. And so they said, look, it's not looking good. And I said, we're going to beat it. And I told him to get his head in the game. He's really, he's lived a full life. And so I know what it's like. It was one of the worst things to ever see a human being go through.
Yeah. It's terrible. It's been 10 years. In 2013, I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, large B cell, stage 3.5. And I always tease my doctor that he's told me stage 3.5 because he didn't want to tell me it was stage 4. But yeah, I thought it was a death sentence. It came in my lymph node here and ballooned up in a matter of months. Really bad. I got diagnosed on a Wednesday, and I was in chemo the following Tuesday. I did RCHOP, which is abbreviation for 5 chemo drugs, and I did it 6 times, 6 rounds. So I did 30 different chemo drugs. Horrible, lost my hair, looked terrible, thought I was going to die after the 4th one, started to face the reality of this is not good. But I just, did a lot of praying. I sometimes feel guilty because I'll say that the closest I ever was to God is when I was really sick and not doing well. I was a vegetarian when I got cancer. I had been a vegetarian for more than 20 years when I got cancer. I have a very close friend. She's extremely famous. If I said her name, you all would know. She's a health guru, and she said, "You got to get off this vegetarianism." And so she helped me really think about food in a different way. And she's got this rule that says food must spoil. If your bread's not spoiling, if your vegetables aren't spoiling, they've been sprayed to an inch of their life and they're not good. It's not good for you. So I just began to think differently. did a lot of praying, and I beat it. And it's 10 years later, but I still go every 3 months to the City of Hope and get a full checkup because my cancer was pretty aggressive. I feel like cancer made me, I never want to go through it again. And if it came back, I'm not sure I could go through it again, the chemo part. But I do have to say, with perspective, I wouldn't ever want to go through it again. But cancer made me a better person. It made me think differently about how I save and spend, how I look at friends, who's in my life. I just don't care as much about the little things of like, oh, someone doesn't like you or people said bad things about you. I'm like, I don't even know them. Like, who cares? Who cares if it doesn't like me? I may not like you.
Yeah. So first, happy you were able to get through that, and
Thank you.
Also, I think it's fantastic to be able to go through such hardship and come out a better person. And I think that's I know this is extremely terrible, but oftentimes these are missed opportunities. Having to go through all of that and then not
And be
somehow-
bitter or
Exactly.
mad or,
So that, and then also shout out to City of Hope. My father also went to City of Hope. I think best decision we could have made. Incredible research that goes on there. They're well funded. So they do, and their bedside manners is fantastic.
Yeah.
I think I couldn't say
They got me through it.
enough great things about that. So that's the thing. And so we're really, I'm glad you're sharing your story. Similarly, I mean, I didn't go through cancer myself. Again, my father did. The importance of relationships, I think it was really put front and center because it really starts your world becomes so myopic, and you start to think, you're like, my God, this is it.
Yeah.
And you really start to reevaluate what's valuable and what isn't. So
I think what you end up doing is when you're faced with the end of your life and you lose hope, you start to say, well, was that it? That was life. What did I accomplish? What did I mean? What's my legacy? Am I not going to have a legacy? Is it just going to be, he's dead and we forgot about him? Which maybe could be fine, but it wasn't fine for me. I wanted to think about making my short life impactful and leaving the world better than when I came into it. And that to me was the criteria. Is this world better? Did I have a impact on the world to make it a little bit better? Or did I just take and selfishly leave the world with, whatever I could take? And I'm really proud of what I've been able to do. We now have this free healthcare technology called Wave Health. It's available on the Apple or Google Play, Apple Store or Google Play. It's in 6 different languages. It's in Arabic. You can download it if your phone is set to Arabic.
what does it do?
And it's this thing called an EPRO, an electronic patient reported outcome. There's a new thing, and it really became popular after COVID, although we were doing it before, is on your phone, you use predictive analytics and artificial intelligence. You put in your disease, your drugs, and everything. It pulls in moon phase. You add how much water you're doing today, exercise, and it, through predictive analytics, helps you figure out how to do better in your disease, whether you have diabetes or with a lot of people with mental illness are using it, anxiety, depression, all sorts of diseases, 250 diseases. You pick the disease and then you fill in all this stuff. Through predictive analytics and AI, it'll help you be empowered through this. It makes little suggestions. People in your situation did better if they drank more water or they got more exercise, little tips, and it feeds you to be in control of, instead of waiting for your doctor every 8 weeks to go in and do a checkup. Every day you're connected and you feel connected to, and I was showing my doctor the information.
So it empowers proactive wellness.
Totally. And I can tell you it makes a world of difference. It's free. You should totally get it and try it.
Where can we find more about that?
It's Wave Health, and it's on Google Play and
And where can people find you
store.
online? What are your social handles?
On Truth, it's at Grenell. Instagram, at Richard Grenell. Twitter, at Richard Grenell. I think that's all I have.
Ric, thanks for joining us today.
Oh my gosh, such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership on all these political issues. I'm a big fan. And
thank you. I appreciate that. It came out as a huge surprise, and I do very much appreciate that that you watched the show, and I don't know what to say. So thank you.
Can I ask you one question about
Yeah,
Big
sure,
Brother?
of course.
Who's your favorite Big Brother player of all time besides you?
Well, I like different people for different reasons.
Give me a couple.
So I think Janelle, of course. I'm a huge supporter of her.
Didn't she live in Playa Vista?
I don't think so. I think Will Kirby.
I knew Will did.
Yeah, I think he lived in this area. So Will Kirby is a phenomenal personality and player. He, I don't agree with him from a lots of different standpoints, but I will say you have to give credit where credit's due.
Oh yeah,
he is a force.
Yeah.
And so brilliant mind. And I think there are certain people that are played like him who are just phenomenal. Who are
but
able
you can't go into Big Brother and just be like, I'm going to be honest all the time.
Yeah,
it's a
so
game. You got to be dishonest.
Well, it depends on your position, right? And so I think even for me to go into the show, I couldn't take that position because I was already labeled, right? So I can't go in as the
lying
lying Muslim. They're like, we knew it. We knew that was going to happen.
You should have said, I'm the most cunning person I happen to be Muslim, and I'm going to fake it and win.
Exactly. So I was like, I'm screwed. It's like, let me just hang out and have lunch. I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
You should have just brought some random objects into the house. They probably don't even know anything about Islam.
know.
Just some
Yeah,
random
that would have been hilarious.
looking things.
This elixir brings eternal
Yeah,
luck.
exactly.
Everybody who knows me says you would have been kicked off Big Brother in the first day.
I think you probably would have done pretty well. I don't know.
No, I'm too opinionated.
It's never too late. You should do it. Celebrity Big Brother or Dancing with the Stars.
There you go.
Go for it.
There you go.
I think
Such a pleasure.
But thank you so much for having us. I think this really highlights the point of you don't have to agree with everything, and this is how we all started because we don't agree on anything. But it's for us to come together and have really awesome conversations.
Yeah.
And so if you want to cancel us, or you want to follow us, or you want to hear more things that are going to enrage you, because we're going to continue to bring people who you don't agree with on the show, follow us on social. Follow Ric on social if you want to also be enraged by his points of view. But thank you again for coming on. It's been a pleasure, honestly, and for us I've learned a lot. So I appreciate anything or anyone that allows that to happen. So thank you.
All the best.
Thank you, Ric.